Welcome to our short stories. Sit back and enjoy a brief tale crafted just for you, filled with rich vocabulary and elegant phrasing. BYE Boost Your English Episode 6, The Hovercraft Adventure. Welcome back to BYE Boost Your English, your personal guide to building precise and useful vocabulary for real-life conversations. I'm Sonia, and in this episode, we are going beyond new vocabulary. We're traveling back in time. I'm going to tell you the story, from the inside, of my very first school trip to England. Get ready for shoulder pads and Walkmans. The date is May 1985, and we're heading to London. The journey began at Gare du Nord in Paris. Imagine 30 teenagers, huge bags, and 2 determined but tired teachers. The first leg was a fast turbo train ride up north to Boulogne-sur-Mer. It was a standard journey, full of bad jokes and excitement. But the real thrill, the high-tech marvel of the 80s, was crossing the Channel. From Boulogne, we boarded a hover-speed hovercraft, heading for Dover. Our teacher, Madame Duval, shouted over the noise, "We are not on a boat, we are on an air cushion. Hold tight." She was right. When those huge turbines roared, the entire deck shook. We felt the hovercraft lift onto its rubber skirt, then blast over the sea. It was more like a low-flying aircraft than a ferry. The noise was intense, the spray was high, and the crossing was done in just over 30 minutes. It was truly a spectacular entry into the UK. From Dover, we took a British rail train straight to London. London in 1985 felt different, a bit gritty, but exciting. The taxis were black, the air smelled of diesel, and those iconic red phone boxes were everywhere, even though we heard they were starting to vanish. Our other teacher, Madame Leclerc, constantly reminded us, "Look right, children. It is a national cause to look right before you step off the curb." We were quickly distributed to our host families in the suburbs. The biggest culture shock was the food routine, the packed lunch. Forget our hot midday meals. Every morning, we received a paper bag containing a slightly soft, white bread sandwich, an apple, and a small carton of juice. "Why don't they heat the food?" my classmate complained. Our teacher explained, "It's the packed lunch tradition, a different culture. Eat up, we have a busy schedule." Our week-long schedule was intense. Of course, we saw the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. The precision of the soldiers and their bearskin hats were totally impressive. We toured the Houses of Parliament, saw Big Ben, and walked across Tower Bridge. We were exhausted, but every sight was a lesson. But the must-see for us teenagers was Madame Tussauds. It was the only place we could meet our contemporary idols, like Michael Jackson and other pop icons of the time. The queues were long, but posing next to these incredibly realistic wax figures felt like getting a 1985 celebrity selfie. After a hectic week, the journey home felt quieter. The same rush of the hovercraft back to Boulogne, and the turbo train to Paris. We returned home with notebooks full of English expressions, a strange appreciation for the British sandwich, and a head full of memories that would certainly not be forgotten anytime soon. Key vocabulary explained. To travel back in time, to imagine, remember, or experience a past era through a story or historical context. For example, looking at old photographs from the 1980s makes me feel like I am traveling back in time. The inside story, an account of an event given by someone who was directly involved and experienced it personally. For example, the retired captain gave us the inside story of how the giant hovercraft operated in rough seas. High-tech marvel, a spectacular and highly advanced piece of technology for its time. For example, in the mid-1980s, the large passenger hovercraft was considered a high-tech marvel of British engineering. Air cushion, a layer of trapped, compressed air that supports a vehicle above the ground or water surface. For example, the unique design allowed the vessel to glide smoothly over the waves on a thick air cushion. To blast over, to move across a surface or distance with immense speed, power, and noise. For example, we watched the cross-channel ferry leave the harbour just as the hovercraft began to blast over the water. Gritty, having a rough, raw, and unpolished appearance, often associated with old industrial cities. For example, parts of East London looked quite gritty in the past, but they possessed an undeniable energy. Iconic, widely recognized and well established as a famous symbol of a particular place, culture, or era. For example, the red double-decker bus remains one of the most iconic sights in the United Kingdom. Curb, the raised stone edging that forms the border between a pavement and a road. For example, in Britain, pedestrians are always advised to stop at the curb and check the traffic carefully. Culture shock, the feeling of disorientation or surprise experienced by someone who is suddenly subjected to an unfamiliar culture or way of life. For example, moving from a traditional hot lunch to a cold sandwich routine caused a bit of culture shock for the young international students. Packed lunch, a meal, usually consisting of sandwiches, fruit, and a drink, prepared at home or by a host family to be eaten at work, school, or on a trip. For example, the host family provided every student with a nutritious packed lunch before they left for the day-long excursion. Changing of the guard, a formal, highly disciplined ceremony where the sentries guarding a royal palace are relieved by a new detachment of soldiers. For example, tourists from all over the world gather outside the palace gates to watch the changing of the guard. Bearskin hat, a tall, heavy cap made of real or synthetic fur, worn as part of the ceremonial uniform of certain British regiments. For example, the guard stood perfectly still outside the royal residence despite the weight of his traditional bearskin hat. Contemporary idols, famous figures, such as pop musicians or actors, who are highly popular and widely admired during the specific time period being discussed. For example, in 1985, teenagers flocked to the museum to see the new wax figures of their contemporary idols. Wax figure, a life-sized, highly detailed sculpture of a famous person made from a specific wax mixture for exhibition. For example, the artistry required to create a realistic wax figure means that each exhibit takes several months to complete. Celebrity selfie, a photograph that a person takes of themselves, typically with a smartphone, alongside a famous individual. For example, standing next to the realistic models allowed us to create the 1980s equivalent of a celebrity selfie. Now that the comments are open on YouTube, I invite you all to share your reactions, ideas, and requests below. Let's make sure we keep the discussion mutually respectful. Thank you for joining me on this 80s flashback episode. I look forward to guiding your English boost in the next episode of BYE. Keep boosting your English. Bye for now.
Boost your English, it's the key!